I wasn't supposed to be near the bride's room. I'd gone there on instinct, planning to offer Claire a private word, maybe a prayer, if I was feeling generous. I hadn't knocked yet. The door was cracked open just enough. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but what I heard froze the breath in my lungs. "I'm divorcing him once the inheritance clears." Claire's voice was low. I wouldn't have recognized it. It lacked the syrupy tone she usually wore around me, like perfume. But it was her. No mistaking it. "He thinks he's so smart with his trust fund," she continued, her voice tightening with glee. "But a divorce settlement will unlock it all. Clean. Break. No prenup. No problem." Then came the laughter. Not the kind that bubbles up from joy or surprise. No, this was sharp, serrated, a laugh that had cut through others before and left scars. I didn't move. Not at first. My mind went blank, then razor-focused. I turned, walked back down the hall, and smiled at the usher who opened the main doors for me. Let her have her little ceremony. The dress, the walk down the aisle, the lies, wrapped in lace. I would let her believe she'd won. Her plan ended before it even began. I thought because I wasn't just his mother. I was a judge, a strategist, a woman who'd buried a husband with dignity, raised a son with values, and spent 40 years watching people lie for a living. Claire had no idea the trial she just walked into. Mark stood at the altar, back straight, eyes locked on the church doors like he was watching a dream come true. His tuxedo didn't quite fit his shoulders. He always hated tailoring, but his smile was real, open, trusting, stupidly, painfully real. And I knew in that moment that I would burn the world down to protect his light. I sat in the front pew, hands folded over my clutch. I could hear the music, see the flowers, smell the roses, but it all felt far away, like I was underwater. My heart beat slow and cold. Claire walked down the aisle in white lace and false purity, her eyes locked on my son, like a prize she'd already counted. I almost laughed. If only she knew how much her little performance had cost her. When the priest asked if anyone had any objections, I felt my fingers twitch. My mouth stayed shut. Not yet. Not in front of God. Not on Mark's wedding day. He still believed this was love, but I knew. I knew the moment I heard her say it. "I'm divorcing him once the inheritance clears." The rest of the ceremony was a blur. Vows recited, rings exchanged, fake tears, applause, a kiss that meant nothing. Her smile was a performance, and I was watching a play with a tragic ending. At the reception, Claire flitted through the room like a socialite at an auction. She barely touched her husband, my son. Instead, she spent her time cozying up to the wealthier guests. She greeted our family lawyer like an old friend. She laughed too long at a financial advisor's boring story. She made herself the center of every conversation, but none of them were with Mark's friends, not the ones who knew who he really was. I sat and watched, silent, observing, recording. This wasn't a celebration. This was the opening scene of a courtroom drama, and Claire, bless her heart, had just stepped onto the witness stand without even knowing it. She leaned in to kiss Mark on the cheek once, camera ready and hollow. Then her eyes flicked past him toward the corner table where the family accountant sat. She had no instinct for subtlety, only greed, and greed always leaves a paper trail. Back at my table, I raised my champagne glass and gave a small smile. To the other guests, I looked like a proud mother. But inside, the judge was awake. 3 days after the wedding, I showed up at Mark's house with a bottle of wine and a basket of newlywed essentials, olive oil, a set of antique salt cellars, and the sharpest eyes in the room. Claire greeted me at the door, wearing silk pajamas and no bra, as if she had already claimed her throne. "Evelyn," she purred, "you didn't have to bring anything." I smiled. "Oh, but I did." She barely hid her annoyance when I stepped inside and started unpacking the basket myself. Mark was working late, convenient. She offered me tea but didn't stick around to chat. That's when I saw it, a drawer slightly open, just enough to invite curiosity. Just enough to make me wonder what she forgot to hide. I waited until she stepped into the bathroom. I moved quickly, smoothly. I had done searches with warrants and without. My hands didn't shake. Inside that drawer, beneath a stack of expensive lingerie, was a file folder, legal documents. And not just any paperwork. It wasn't a prenup. It wasn't even addressed to Mark. No, this was a request for disclosure of beneficiary trust holdings, a document filed 3 months before the wedding. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a scheme, it was strategy. Claire had filed to access financial information about my son's trust well before she ever slipped on that engagement ring. The ink had dried before the invitations went out. She wasn't marrying into a family. She was staging a financial heist. I snapped a photo of the document with my phone and slid everything back exactly how I found it. When Claire returned, she looked at me strangely. I smiled again, gracious, grandmotherly. She poured my tea with trembling hands. She didn't know what I'd found, but she could sense something. Predators always can. I left the house that evening with polite hugs and empty compliments, but inside, something had shifted. The mourning mother was gone. The grieving widow had stepped aside. Now the judge was back in session, and I was preparing my opening statement. I sat in my study that night, with the photo of Claire's document glowing on my phone screen. The house was quiet, save for the low hum of the grandfather clock in the corner, the one James wound every Sunday for 30 years. It hadn't missed a tick even after he died. I stared at the screen for a long time. The legal language didn't scare me. I'd written more dangerous motions in my time. But what sent a chill down my spine was the date. That date, 3 months before the wedding, made everything undeniable. She'd been planning this before she ever loved him, if she ever did. I thought about James, how we built that trust for Mark when he was just a boy, how we agreed to keep it out of reach until he truly needed it. Because love wasn't something you bought into, it was something you earned. Claire wasn't just a liar, she was a tactician, and if I was going to win this, I had to become one again. Grief had made me quiet, but betrayal made me sharp. I pulled out my yellow legal pad and drew a line down the center. Evidence on one side, leverage on the other. Old habits die hard. In a case like this, emotion was a distraction. I needed facts, witnesses, timing, motive. I wasn't going to cry into a wine glass or plead with my son to open his eyes. No, I would build a case. Ironclad, indisputable. First, I needed someone I could trust. I picked up the phone and called Sarah Jenkins, my old court assistant. She hadn't aged a day, still sharp as a tack and twice as discreet. "Sarah," I said, "I need a favor and your silence." I told her everything in bullet points. The overheard conversation, the staged wedding, the financial file. She didn't interrupt, once. When I was done, she asked only one question. "Do you want me to dig deep, or do you want it clean?" "Deep," I said, "buried bodies and all, because if you want the truth, you don't skim the surface. You dig until your nails bleed." Next, I called Robert Lane, retired private investigator. He'd worked 2 custody cases with me back in '04. Quiet man, smart eyes, never lost a trail. "Follow the money," I told him. "I want everything, bank accounts, texts, call logs. If she so much as whispered about this plan, I want to know who heard it." He laughed softly. "You're not pulling punches on this one, huh?" "I'm not here to slap a wrist," I said. "I'm here to end a con." After I hung up, I looked around my study. The room was filled with reminders of a life lived by principle, law books, framed commendations, a photo of Mark in his white coat. He trusted people too easily. It was both his strength and his fatal flaw. He healed broken bodies, but he couldn't recognize a broken soul. That's where I came in. My job wasn't to break Claire. My job was to lift the blindfold off my son's eyes. This wasn't revenge. Not really. It was protection. It was justice. It was love wrapped in legal procedure and strategic silence. Claire had just become the defendant in a trial she didn't even know had begun. The call came just after 8. I was reading depositions from an old case, not because I had to, but because clarity lived in the familiar structure of legal text. My phone buzzed once. Robert Lane. I answered with a calm voice, but my grip tightened instinctively. "I've got something," he said without preamble. "You're going to want to sit down." "I'm already sitting," I replied. But after what he said next, I wished I hadn't been. Claire met with the divorce attorney a month before the wedding. I didn't speak. Not yet. I let the silence stretch, hoping he'd say he was mistaken, that the name was wrong. He wasn't. "Name's Anthony Gisham. You recognize it?" Anthony Gisham. That was the name she whispered at the church when she thought no one was listening. When she said, "Anthony says the settlement won't be a problem," my blood ran cold, not from fear. Fear was a luxury I had burned out of myself years ago. No, this was something worse: recognition. This wasn't just a woman chasing a comfortable life. This was a strategy meeting with counsel conducted before vows were even exchanged. This was legal planning for betrayal. "She didn't just fall out of love," I said quietly. She prepared her exit before she walked in. Robert paused. "You want the details, emails, financials, everything?" "Every word," I said. "I want the timestamps. I want the billing statements. I want to know who paid for it and what was discussed. Because this wasn't just greed anymore. This was a structured, professional attempt to extract wealth through manipulation, and it had a paper trail." Robert's voice was firm. "You've got a case building, Evelyn. But you're not just fighting her anymore. You're fighting him, too. Gisham's no amateur. He's the kind that wipes fingerprints off every conversation." Good. That meant he'd be arrogant. Arrogance was always a gift in court. I thanked him, hung up, and stared out the window. The sun was setting slow and red, casting long shadows over the garden James and I once planted together. I used to believe evil came with warning signs, with fury, with shouting, with violence. But I'd learned it often came quietly, with polished smiles, with gentle lies, with a white dress and a forged document tucked in a drawer. Claire hadn't just married my son. She had declared war on my family, and I was just beginning to sharpen my weapons. The phone was still warm in my hand. I dialed Sarah next. Pull every legal filing connected to Gisham in the past year. I said if Claire was his client, we'd find something. Sarah didn't ask questions. That's why I trusted her. She just replied, "On it," and hung up. Mark still didn't know. My son, so full of love and hope, was sleeping beside a woman planning his financial execution. I thought about waking him, telling him, letting the truth crash down in one brutal moment. But that wouldn't work. He'd defend her. He'd say I misunderstood or took things out of context. He wasn't ready to see it. Not yet. I had to wait, build, prepare. The law was my sword, but timing was my shield. Claire had no idea I was on to her. That was my advantage. I wouldn't waste it. She thought she'd married into a bank account. She hadn't. She'd married into a courtroom, and I never lose in court. I invited them to dinner. Mark sounded surprised on the phone. "Dinner? On a Tuesday?" "Yes," I said sweetly. "Just us three. I've been going through some of your father's old files. I thought we should discuss some family matters." There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, everything's wonderful," I lied. "You're newlyweds after all. It's time I gave you both a proper welcome into the next phase of your life." Claire would hear only one thing: family papers. She'd smell money the way sharks smell blood. I set the dining room with the good china, candlelight, and a bottle of Bordeaux Mark loved. I wore pearls, James's favorite strand. I needed them to see the image, warm, trusting, vulnerable. I needed Claire to lower her guard. They arrived at 6:45. Claire kissed my cheek like she always did. 2 seconds too long, too staged. She wore red lipstick and a watch I hadn't seen before. Gold new. Mark smiled at me, exhausted and happy, still playing the role of husband without knowing the curtain had already started falling. Dinner was light conversation. Mark talked about work. Claire mentioned redecorating the guest room. I smiled, nodded, and refilled their glasses. Then, just as dessert was served, I placed a single sealed envelope on the table. Her eyes locked, onto it like a starving animal spotting meat. "I've been reviewing the estate," I said gently, "and with everything happening lately, I thought it was time to formalize a gift." Mark leaned in. "A gift?" "Yes, a significant one." Claire's hand twitched, just once. She didn't know whether to reach for it or wait. That was good. That meant she was calculating. That meant she was listening. "I've drafted a document," I continued, "to establish a new trust fund specifically for you both as a couple, something separate from Mark's inheritance, yours together. It's not finalized yet, but I wanted you to see it. If you're interested, you'll need a lawyer to review it. And of course, a witness when it's time to sign." That was the bait. Shiny, tempting, and just out of reach. Claire leaned back, trying to act casual. "That's very generous, Evelyn." "It's overdue," I replied. "You're family now, and families take care of one another." Mark beamed. "Mom, this is incredible." He believed every word. Of course he did. But Claire, she was already working the angles. She wouldn't be able to help herself. I had handed her a golden door and given her the keys. All she had to do was walk in. We finished dessert. I poured more wine. The envelope sat untouched between us like a loaded gun. She wouldn't open it here. No, she was too smart for that. But she'd read it the moment they got home. She'd call her lawyer the next day, and that's exactly what I needed her to do. When they stood to leave, Claire hugged me again, tighter this time. "I'm really grateful," she said, her voice soft. "I know you are," I replied. She didn't realize I wasn't handing her a gift. I was handing her the noose. Claire thinks she's holding the key to a fortune, but she just stepped into my trap and the lock is about to snap shut. The call came mid-morning. I was pruning the hydrangeas out front, wearing old gardening gloves and sunglasses. Claire's name flashed across my phone, and I let it ring twice before I answered. "Evelyn," she said, breathy. "Casual, too casual." "The documents you gave me? My lawyer's reviewing them, and he just had a few questions. He needs a little more detail before we move forward." Her voice shook, just enough for someone like me to hear it. She tried to bury her excitement under calm, but excitement has a sound. It's high-pitched, barely restrained. I could hear it in her throat. She'd already spoken to him. She hadn't hesitated. She had taken the bait so quickly, it nearly startled me. Not just interested, engaged. Not just curious, committed. She was already counting the money. I let her sit in the silence for a beat too long. "I see," I said evenly. "Well, I'd prefer to answer those questions in person. Why don't you stop by tomorrow? I'll have everything ready for you." "Oh, sure. Tomorrow's great," she said. "Should I bring my lawyer?" I smiled, as if she could hear it. "If that makes you feel better." And there it was, the admission. Not legal, not recorded, not something a judge could pin down. But I didn't need a courtroom yet. I needed proof of intent, and she had just given it to me. She was willing to risk everything for the illusion of a quick payday. She saw my trust as weak, my generosity as foolish, my love for my son as leverage. But love wasn't my weakness. It was my warning. I hung up and went back to my flowers, snipped a few dead blooms, let the sun hit my shoulders. She thought she was negotiating a windfall, But all she'd done was confirm what I already knew. She was guilty, eager, sloppy, and most important of all, she was mine now. Wrapped neatly inside a plan she didn't even realize she was helping me write. There's something exquisite about the moment a liar thinks they've won. The subtle shift in their voice, the way they reach too quickly, how they forget to check their step because they believe the ground beneath them is stable. But I had been pouring water over that floorboard for weeks, and tomorrow she'd walk right into the rot. She arrived at 3:01 p.m. on the dot. Claire stepped into my home dressed like she was headed to a board meeting. Navy blazer, pencil skirt, heels too sharp for a house with carpets. Her lawyer, Anthony Gisham, followed close behind, tall, practiced, with that cheap cologne smell so many men like him wore, masking something rotten. I greeted them with a smile, not warm, not cold, just enough to keep them comfortable. "Thank you for coming," I said, leading them into the study. Mark was upstairs, deliberately kept out of earshot. I hadn't told him about the meeting. Not yet. We sat. Claire crossed her legs too quickly. Her lawyer set down his briefcase like he expected a standard review. "I have something for you to sign," I said, pulling out 2 documents and placing them side by side on the polished oak table. The first was exactly what she expected, the trust agreement I'd fabricated. It looked real, felt real, and carried all the right numbers and promises. The second was not. I watched her eyes flick to it, then hesitate. "This," I said, tapping the second document, "is a legal affidavit. It confirms that I personally overheard you discussing your intent to divorce my son after securing access to his inheritance." Claire's posture stiffened. I turned slightly toward her lawyer. "And this second page outlines the conditions under which the trust is to be dissolved immediately. If she divorces Mark, or if evidence of premeditated fraud surfaces, the entire agreement becomes void. Additionally, she will be required to repay any dispersed funds and assume liability for damages." Gisham blinked, his mouth opened, then closed again. Claire looked at me, eyes wide, as if trying to decide whether to explode or faint. Neither would help her now. She was cornered, and I hadn't raised my voice once. "I never said," Claire started. "I have names," I interrupted. "Dates, conversations. Your call to this man," I gestured to Gisham without looking at him, "took place a full month before your wedding. You discussed inheritance law, divorce proceedings, strategy." She stared at me. Her lawyer leaned forward, trying to regain control. "I must protest," he said carefully. "This seems highly irregular." "What's irregular?" I cut in, my voice cool as glass. "Is bringing a fraudulent marriage into a family with a judge for a mother?" I watched the color drain from Claire's face. She wasn't just caught, she was exposed in front of the very man she thought would protect her. Gisham cleared his throat. "I think we should pause here." "By all means," I said. "Take all the time you need, but do read every word, especially the part about financial penalties in the event of proven intent to defraud." It was all right there, neatly typed, legally binding. The trap she walked straight into now sat in front of her in black and white, and still I smiled, calm, controlled, because nothing shakes a liar like silence from the one who already knows the truth. Claire went pale, not embarrassed, pale, like her blood had drained somewhere else. Her eyes darted between me and her lawyer, her lips slightly parted, breath shallow. "This is slander," she finally snapped, her voice cracking. "You can't just accuse me of plotting something like this. You don't have proof." I looked at her, steady as stone. "It's not slander when it's true," I said quietly. "And more importantly, it's not an accusation, it's documentation." She glanced at Gisham, waiting for him to jump in. He didn't. He just stared at the papers, blinking like he'd stepped into the wrong meeting. Because this wasn't just a warning, it was a record. Every word now a weight against her. Claire pushed her chair back an inch, ready to retreat, but I lifted a hand, gently. "I wouldn't leave just yet," I said. "There's more." I stood and walked to the side table where a small camera sat, discreet and silent, red light blinking. "That camera has been recording since you walked in." Her breath caught. Now the air changed. Not just tension, panic, the kind that people try to swallow and fail. And just in case you thought I was bluffing, I stepped toward the hallway and opened the door. Sarah stepped in, poised, professional, holding a folder in one hand. "This is Sarah Jenkins, former assistant from my chambers. She's here to confirm everything that's been said," and I added, looking at Claire. "She was also present the day I found the request you filed about Mark's trust." Claire didn't blink. She didn't move. She was frozen in her chair, hands now clenched together in her lap. That's when I knew it. She wasn't fighting. She was calculating whether she could still run. You walked into a home thinking you'd manipulate a grieving mother. You thought because I smiled at the wedding, I didn't see through you. You thought because I was old, I was weak. I stepped closer. You were wrong because weakness isn't quiet. Quiet is preparation. Quiet is the sound right before the verdict. And Claire, she was now sitting in the middle of her own trial, surrounded by evidence, a witness, and her own voice, recorded and trembling. The door opened slowly. Mark stepped. In, eyes tired, shirt sleeves rolled up, his doctor's badge still clipped to his belt. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. I had asked him to give us an hour, but he had come home early, as he often did, with no warning and no understanding of the moment he was walking into. He took 2 steps into the room and froze. Claire was seated, stiffly, pale as bone, her lawyer silent beside her. Sarah stood in the corner with a composed stillness that only came from years inside a courtroom. I stood near the documents on the table. The room smelled like candle wax and unraveling truths. Mark looked at Claire first, then at me. His eyes landed on the open folder on the table, then the camera still blinking red. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know who to look at for the answer. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low, unsure. I didn't say a word because I wanted her to speak first. I wanted him to hear what desperation sounded like. Claire shot up from her chair like she'd been slapped. Her voice came out shrill, unsteady. "Your mother is trying to ruin everything. She set me up." Mark stared at her, blinking. "She's paranoid," Claire snapped. "She doesn't want you to have anything. She's making it all about money so she can keep control of the trust of you." There it was, the lie wrapped in panic, the last gasp of someone who knew she'd been caught. Mark turned to me, eyes wide, confusion spilling across his face. "Mom, what is she talking about?" I didn't move. Claire took a shaky breath, pushing forward. "She never liked me, Mark. She's always wanted to drive a wedge between us. Now she's digging through lawyers and papers and making up things that never happened." She was flailing. Her mask had slipped, and now she was clawing at the pieces, trying to reassemble the sweet, supportive wife she had played for so long. I watched Mark's face. I saw the cracks forming. He looked at Sarah, then at the camera, then at the second document, the one bearing Claire's name and mine, and the fine print she hadn't realized was her confession. "Claire," he said slowly, "did you talk to a lawyer before the wedding?" She froze. His voice tightened. "Did you?" She looked at him. Tears began to form. Not the kind that fall, but the kind that are manufactured on demand. Just enough shimmer to confuse a man who still wanted to believe. "I had questions," she whispered. "It was before we got married, and I just wanted to protect us." "You didn't have a prenup." I didn't know what I was walking into. But she wasn't pleading innocence. She was bargaining guilt. Mark stepped closer to the table. He picked up the trust document, then the affidavit beneath it. His fingers shook slightly as he flipped through the pages. "You plan to leave me," he said. You married me for money." "I didn't," she said, voice rising. "It changed. I fell in love. I didn't know what I was doing at first, but it changed, Mark." He looked at me, hurt, confused, but no longer blind, and I finally spoke. "I told you once, I said that love without respect is just theater, and she's been performing since the day you met her." It wasn't just the documents in front of him now. It was the silence between the lines, the weight of every moment he'd missed, every warning he'd brushed aside. Mark didn't say anything else, not to her, not yet. Mark stood silent, papers trembling in his hands. Claire's breath was shallow now, her chest rising too fast, like she was trying to outrun something she couldn't see. I moved toward the table, slowly, calmly, like I was in court again, walking the jury through the final exhibit. "Mark," I said gently, "I need you to look at this." I picked up the document Claire had hidden, the one from her drawer, where she kept lingerie and legal, intent side by side. I laid it down in front of him. 3 months before your wedding," I said, tapping the date with one finger. "She filed a request for disclosure on your trust. You never saw this because it wasn't meant for your eyes." He didn't move. "She consulted a divorce attorney. His name is Anthony Gisham. That name should sound familiar." Mark's brow furrowed, then a flicker of memory. He looked at Claire. "You mentioned that name at the church right before the ceremony." Claire opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the space. "Not only did she meet with him," I said, "but they discussed what she called pre-litigation strategies for how to access your inheritance during divorce." His hands fell to his sides. He didn't ask if it was true. He already knew. I turned to the camera on the shelf and clicked the remote. The room fell into a quiet hum as the video began to play. Claire's voice filled the air from just 2 days earlier. "My lawyer needs a few more details to finalize things." The tone, the tremble, the greed buried under feigned professionalism. Mark watched, not blinking. Then I placed the final piece. "This trust," I said, holding up the first document, the one she'd been so eager to sign, "is fake, fabricated. It was never real. I created it to draw her in, to give her the opportunity to choose honesty or exposure." Claire stared at the floor. Now? She didn't cry. She didn't speak because the performance was over, and the audience was gone. Mark looked at her, long and quiet, his face no longer confused. He didn't see his wife anymore. He saw the woman who staged a wedding as a financial strategy. His voice came low. "Leave." Claire flinched. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He just said it again. "Leave." She looked at me just once, like maybe I'd say something merciful. But I didn't. She had gambled everything on the assumption I wouldn't fight. And now she was standing in the wreckage of her own scheme. Without a word, Claire turned and walked out. No tears, no goodbye, only the quiet sound of a door closing behind her. The divorce papers were filed 4 days later by Mark. He didn't tell me at first, just disappeared for a few hours and came home with an envelope under his arm. He didn't cry, he didn't curse, he didn't ask for advice. He just placed the envelope on my kitchen counter and said, "It's done." Claire had tried to get ahead of him. I found out through Sarah that she contacted her lawyer less than 24 hours after walking out of my house. She tried to twist the story, tried to spin it like she was the wronged one, but she was too late. The moment that camera recorded her, the moment her voice confessed, she lost control of the narrative. She had played the long game, but I had written the ending before she finished her first move. Mark's petition was clean, decisive. Adultery wasn't the issue. Fraud was strategic misrepresentation for financial gain. That was the language we used. It wasn't just a marriage ending. It was a formal declaration that she had never deserved the title of wife in the first place. Claire didn't fight the paperwork, not after seeing what we had on her. Her lawyer's silence was louder than any argument. She signed. But the fallout didn't stop there. She'd built her image carefully, charming, social, generous. But reputations crack easily when truth leaks. It wasn't long before whispers turned to calls, then posts, then silence. The gallery she had invested in quietly removed her from its board. One of Mark's hospital colleagues, who had been fooled by her charm, told him over coffee, "I didn't want to believe it, but damn, I should have seen it." And the money? She gave it back. Every cent she'd moved without Mark's knowledge, because we made sure keeping it would cost her far more. There's nothing quite like watching someone scramble to preserve dignity after trying to steal it from others. And Mark, he moved like a man waking from a long sleep. He didn't lash out. He didn't collapse. He processed slowly, quietly. Every word she'd ever said took on a new meaning now. Every touch, every smile, it all came back to him, reframed. She hadn't just broken his heart. She had made him question whether it had ever been real, and still through it all, he kept his head high. He went to work. He told the truth when people asked, and he didn't flinch, because she hadn't destroyed him. She'd freed him. It had been a hard lesson, but one that saved his life and his fortune. Weeks later, we sat on the porch, just the two of us. Mark stared out at the yard. His hands were steady. His voice was not. "Thank you, Mom," he said. "You saved me." I didn't answer right away. I just nodded because the truth was simple. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it to keep him breathing. A year passed. He remarried. No games, no lies, just love. And as I watched them dance at the small backyard wedding, no fanfare, no photographers, something inside me finally unclenched. She came for our fortune. She never expected I'd fight with silence, law, and patience. My son was safe. My family, whole. I wasn't the villain. I was the firewall. And she never stood a chance. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it struck a chord with you, if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or had to protect someone you love, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, or just let us know where you're listening from.